This is Conversations with Barbara. I'm Barbara Kanellopoulos, and with me today are individuals who represent organizations that have quite a lot to say about the Massachusetts National Guard plan to establish a machine gun range on Joint Base Cape Cod. I will turn to Rosemary, Carey, and to introduce our panel, and they will also mention the organization they represent. Rosemary?
Thank you very much, Barbara, for having us on your show and for examining this very important topic. We are part of a growing coalition opposed to the planned 8-lane machine gun range for Camp Edwards. And on the call, we have Dr. Sandy Faiman-Silva.
Hi, I represent the Coalition for Social Justice.
We have Jim Wolf.
Hi, I'm here representing the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative.
Dr. Madhavi Venkatesan.
Hi, I'm here representing the Sierra Club of Cape Cod as well as Sustainable Practices.
Ella Sampou.
Hello, I'm here representing the Youth Climate Action Network.
And Dr. Jane Ward.
Hi, I'm here representing the Faith Community Environmental Network.
And I'm Rosemary, Carey, representing 350 Cape Cod. We're part of the global network, 350.org and 350 Mass Better Future Project.
Good. Rosemary, let's turn to you. Perhaps you can give us an overview of what this machine gun range is all about.
Very good. Happy to. So, according to this plan, which all of us first learned about in August 2020, the 8-lane gun range would be sited on conservation area in the northern 15,000 acre area of the training base. That area sits atop an aquifer that's the sole source of drinking water for tens of thousands of residents and seasonal visitors to the Cape. It's also the largest piece of undeveloped land and is home to 37 rare and endangered species. After decades of pollution at the base and mitigation costing millions, close to, if not more than $1 billion, the 15,000 acre site was designated by the state as the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve to serve 3 primary purposes. One is water supply and wildlife habitat protection, the development and construction of public water supply systems, and the use and training of military forces of the Commonwealth, provided that such military use and training is compatible with the natural resource purposes of water supply and wildlife habitat protection. So the Joint Base conducted a study, an environmental assessment, and put that out in August and September for public comment. And that study determined that there would be no significant impacts, a finding of no significant impacts, and that it would stir no significant controversy. Mm-hmm. But in that brief comment period, the Environmental Management Commission that's responsible for overseeing the Upper Cape Water Supply received 900 comments from the public. So there are definitely questions about whether this project is appropriate for the Cape, and we're very glad to have the opportunity to share our perspectives.
Good. Let's turn to Dr. Faiman-Silva. Perhaps you can go get some details further about why this is so controversial, why so many people are speaking up about it.
Well, I'm going to point out 5 issues that I think contribute to the controversy, some of which were already alluded to by Rosemary. The first is the environmental fragility, potential degradation and loss of habitat and threats to endangered species with the building of this particular machine gun range project on our sole source aquifer. 15,000 acres of which, again, is the recharge area for our sole source aquifer, and it's designated, it was designated by the EPA as protected watershed. The second issue is that early contamination beginning in about discovered in about 1978 on the base still has not been cleaned up. This particular contamination was brought about by pollution of the waters of the Upper Cape water supply, this sole source aquifer. When about 200 wells were contaminated, mainly in Falmouth and Mashpee, and one town well was contaminated by plumes of contamination that were traveling underground, contaminating the water supply, forcing thousands of residents to have their wells capped, and town water had to be brought into the area. The third problem that we're facing is that promises and commitments made by the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the Mass DEP and the U.S. EPA, again, committed to using this watershed in very circumscribed ways, as Rosemary earlier mentioned, to protect water supply and wildlife habitat, to develop and construct public water supply systems, and to permit the use and training by military forces for the Commonwealth, provided, as she mentioned, that such use and training is compatible with the natural resource purposes of water supply and wildlife habitat protection. So these are very restricted uses by the military. The fourth issue is to, as articulated in the ad that we heard about in August of 2020 that was put into place in the Cape Cod Times, cultural and socioeconomic effects of this proposal were never addressed under the environmental assessment. And the fifth is what appears to be in some ways a cover-up to the public that this project was actually going to happen. It was actually in 2012 was when this particular project was already under consideration by the U.S. Army National Guard. And the public really never really heard about this project, or it wasn't on our radar screens until at least August of 2020. So
That's really
problems.
It seems to me that longtime viewers who are longtime residents of Falmouth will remember the heroic job that some of our local officials did in addressing the problem of water contamination to the Army Corps of Engineers, to the government. And it really was quite a job to get the officials to address this and to clean up that. So now the issue of 117 acres of land being deforested. Jim, can you tell us more about what that's going to impact?
Yes, it's great to be here, get this public conversation rolling. So the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative came together in 2016 post-Paris to try to foster, instigate, and support collaborations of groups on Cape Cod. So that includes citizens, businesses, environmental organizations, government. I'm not going to read you the list of everybody who's on the board and the advisory council, but it's really taken off. And a lot of these studies, even though the military has addressed climate change as the primary defense issue worldwide, including here, climate change is an important factor as we evaluate projects. So when it comes down to 170 acres on our fairly highly developed Cape Cod, you really need the environmental assessment did not address, first of all, an alternative which would be don't fix it unless it's broke, i.e. the Massachusetts military guard being trained in machine gun training in northern Vermont. And so what the collaborative did was we said, well, we got to figure out what is the climate impact of cutting down 170 acres of forest compared to trucking those guys and gals up for their machine gun training somewhere else. This was not even addressed. So we, in the spirit of collaboration, contacted the Woodwell Climate Institute, Research Institute, which was formerly called the Woods Hole Research Organization. Let's figure out, can you help us figure out what does it mean to cut down 170 acres? And I'm not going to go into all the science of it, but there was back and forth, and the Cape Cod Commission was involved in that conversation too. Let's figure this out. Well, it turns out that over 20 years, there's two things you have to calculate. One is the one-time cost, the construction, if you will, of taking all those trees away. And when you kill them and when they die, they immediately start releasing their into the CO2 problem that we have. So you have to calculate that. And then you also have to calculate what is the loss of sequestration of 170 acres of forest. So we calculated that over 20 years with the help of our collaborating organizations. And what we came out with was basically somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million gallons of gasoline over 20 years. And so if you calculate what it takes to truck these soldiers up to Vermont, you will find that it is a net negative impact on the climate goals of both Massachusetts and organizations like the Collaborative to reduce the carbon that CO2 that we're putting into the air. So that's what you get. You get between 2 and 2.5 million gallons of gasoline as a carbon equivalent of the loss of that forest. So that's about as far as I'll go on the science, but anybody who's interested, I can refer them to the people at Woodwell. We feel that's a pretty solid number, and we are concerned that the environmental assessment as is does not take that into account. They simply eliminated looking at an alternative, which would be training these soldiers elsewhere. That's not in the assessment. So we feel it ought to be.
Yes, definitely.
And that's the impact. Sorry, it's a science area, and I struggle with science sometimes, but we got it.
Yeah, but it does point out how how insufficient the calculus was that was done by those who want to get the machine gun range set up. I think I heard Rosemary say that they said that it was not going to be environmentally dangerous or would have a very slight impact. Well, let's turn then to Ella to find out more about what the impact is. Let me see. What do you think, Ella? What do you think that what impacts might be in terms of the problems with water, impacts that are socioeconomic or cultural?
Sure, thank you. I want to start by noting that the Mass Army National Guard did not assess the ability of our community to tolerate the risks posed by the machine gun range. That means that if something were to go wrong, we don't have an assessment of how capable our community is to deal with the fallout. That being said, the environmental assessment concluded that there would be no impact on quality of life, and they refrained from doing detailed analysis on both socioeconomic impacts and environmental justice on the basis that this won't create any long-term jobs, so they don't need to worry about our local economy, and that there are neither enough people living in poverty nor enough minority community members that this could possibly be an issue of environmental justice. I feel this lack of detailed analysis leaves a lot of questions. They deemed noise pollution to be less than significant, and the chance that chemicals could be inadvertently released into our drinking water supply was also named as less than significant. There are a lot of questions. For example, how would this affect our real estate market? Do citizens want to live in neighborhoods that border the machine gun range? If people with means to live somewhere else choose to do so, does this drive down the cost of real estate in the area? While it might not set up an issue of environmental justice in the immediate future, if we think long-term, perhaps if the housing is more affordable due to lower real estate prices, do we over time build a community of low-income people who are dealing with the brunt of the machine gun range? There was no mention of chronic stress in regards to noise pollution. We know that background noise and machine gun fire, even if it's not loud, having that in the background could potentially cause chronic stress for some people that has long-term effects on people's physical and mental health. We know that the Forestdale Elementary School is within earshot of the machine gun range. That raises the question, do parents want to send their children to a school where machine guns can be heard on the playground? Also raises the question of, would this be a distraction to children in the classroom? It's known that students who live in areas with high noise pollution tend to underperform as compared to students with fewer distractions. The amount of forested land that the base has, I think initially could make it a very desirable place to live next to. You know, you have your backyard and then there's preserved land. That's very appealing. But we have to ask if the machine gun range decreases the general desirability of living in the area. Even though the assessment deemed there was no significant risk in regards to water contamination, it's another that poses so many questions. There is a risk, even if it's not technically significant, and what is it like for residents living knowing that that's a problem? Oftentimes with water contamination, you can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's there nonetheless. And it can be a real nightmare to find out that you've been drinking water that might slowly be poisoning you. On top of all of that, the environmental assessment noted that we can expect increased traffic both during construction and also on the occasions where folks are bused in to train. We know traffic on the bridges is a massive problem, both for residents. We don't go anywhere on summer weekends. You don't leave your house. That could also have a negative impact on the tourism that we depend on to pay our bills. If you can't get over the bridge, you know, so I think the assessment just raises more questions than it does answer them.
Yes, so those are very serious personal consequences to one's everyday life. Those really must be made known. I want to turn to Dr. Ward. As a physician and as a retired Army colonel, what is your take on this proposal?
Well, thank you for including me. And as I say, I represent the Faith Community Environmental Network, which is a group of over 30 different faith communities from all types of faith groups who are concerned about how the environment is part of our responsibility to care for, particularly in this time of climate change. I think in terms of my background, I had 26 years of active duty in the Air Force, and I was very conscious the military overall is constrained in our planning, that we have to forecast out years ahead to get the funding to do your next project. And I think that this plan for the base may be an example of the Army planning to train to fight the last war. I would like to ask everybody, when was the last time you heard of us winning a decisive military victory or taking care of one of our major national security issues in a machine gun battle? Even in the prolonged activities in the Mideast and in Afghanistan, we're not having lines of people face each other fighting with machine guns. It's improvised explosive devices, it's sniper fire, it's all sorts of other type of asymmetric warfare.
Right. Yes.
This is not asymmetric warfare.
Oh, I'm so glad you pointed that out. That is, yes, this time of warfare by drones does make a difference, doesn't it?
Or cyber warfare, which we've
Yes.
just dealt with.
Yes,
We
yes.
haven't dealt with, we've heard of cyber warfare. And frankly, as Jim mentioned, climate change has been ranked the #1 national security threat multiplier since, well, really since the 1980s, but definitely in the last 8 years. So climate change is more of a threat to our military and to our national security than any kind of a machine gun dust-off sort of thing.
Yes.
And I really agree both with Jim and Ella too on a number of issues they brought up. This is very inadequate in terms of talking about what is the current situation, how much does that really cost? And by the way, Cape Cod is in the southeast corner of Massachusetts. I'm not sure we're any farther drive for guardsmen coming from Western Massachusetts than it would be for them to drive to Vermont. So the little bit they have in their justification about training time wasted is fairly a lame excuse. I also came across a very interesting Associated Press comment that actually, I'll read it to you because it's pretty enlightening, I think. As Camp Edwards serves as the primary training site for Massachusetts, the proposed action, i.e. developing the machine gun training range, is also needed to ensure the continued and long-term viability of Camp Edwards as a training center. Well, for heaven's sakes, you know, if it has no purpose as a training center, why is it not deeded back to Cape Cod to become an environmental protection area that can protect our water supply? It's a fairly squirrely workup, in my opinion.
These your arguments are so persuasive. It's just hard to believe that this hasn't more thought hasn't gone into this proposal. Let's turn to Dr. Venkatesan. Your concern has been with not only economic impacts, but have you thought about the argument that there are other alternatives to this? It does not need to come to Joint Base Cape Cod.
Well, to continue off of what Dr. Ward just said, I'm just going to make a quote or use the quote, maybe a much older quote than and one that maybe all of us are somewhat familiar with. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And I think that sort of sums up perhaps maybe why we're seeing this desire, its allocation in Joint Base Cape Cod, because it's a desire to actually maintain this site, maintain the jobs that are located there, maintain the viability and the importance of this site without taking into consideration in so doing the qualitative and quantitative impacts to people and the environment that we steward on the Cape. And that's an issue that we need to directly address, because it's not just related to the Cape, but related to so many other types of activities that each one of us engages in directly or indirectly. This just happens to be a great example for us to perhaps maybe engage in a little more critical thinking, that when we engage in an activity, is it our own good that we are looking out for, or are we looking out for our good as well as those of others? Is it a win-win proposition or a win-lose? And I think at this stage in our human existence, we have come to the consideration, because we have to for climate change purposes, but in terms of many other aspects too, we can no longer have a win-lose, because the lose eventually becomes the lose for the win too. Whoever wins only wins in the short run, and that impact that they create for others eventually comes back to affect them as well. So this is also something that Dr. Ward touched on, and I'm just going to piggyback off that for a second. The problem is that our elected officials oftentimes represent individuals who have the greatest voting block in terms of voice as well as financial block power, and they don't necessarily represent the most progressive perspectives. Unfortunately, the most progressive perspectives are usually with the stakeholders of the grassroots organizations that don't necessarily have as much economic clout. And for that reason, we may see policies going into action that are really inconsistent with the changes that need to be made based on the knowledge that we have today. Climate change is one impact of the human impact on this planet. It is the one that's most visible, but we have so many other adverse impacts, from our trash to just even the way that we consume resources on this planet, all of which will eventually be common global issues. So I think it's really important to assess the qualitative as well as the market-based issues here. It's not just looking at the things that we can articulate by value, dollar value. It's also those things that we at this present time cannot articulate. Ella brought up the concept of risk tolerance. In economics, what we refer to when we talk about risk tolerance is, I might be willing to take on this activity, but am I willing to be comfortable with the probabilities that the outcome that I'm hoping for may not materialize? So the risk of the non-materialization of the positive outcome in lieu of the negative outcome being the reality. And that part, in order to be able to really fairly assess that, requires all stakeholders that are engaged, and requires stakeholder engagement with regard to a particular issue. And that, in essence, is probably one of the most key and pivotal elements lacking in this environmental assessment. You cannot have an environmental assessment done from the perspective of one stakeholder. It will only embody the values and benefits to that one stakeholder and undercount by definition, just based on not even any kind of negative or malice intent, the lack of perspective, because there is none in that direction. So without involving stakeholders representing different aspects of this particular project, especially given that it's on a piece of common land that's going to affect all of us, they have very much limited the scope of their analysis. So going forward, the stakeholder engagement component has to be pivotal in any kind of reevaluation. And the question of hierarchy of that stakeholder should not be done by the government or perhaps a civic organization, but by an independent entity to determine which entities need to be put in terms of their responsiveness, their sensitivities at a higher level than others. And that also seems to be missing in this. And I'm just going to make one last comment very quickly. The one element that we all represent is the silent earth that we have to steward. Just because it has no voice doesn't mean that it doesn't get impacted. And we do not take that into consideration enough. It's not just a matter of trees being chopped and the carbon sequestration issues. It's about habitat loss and animals having to be forced to move, without even understanding or comprehending what's happening to them. We are not talking about a situation where dominance can just be the rationale for why we do whatever we do on this planet. Dominance has no value without stewardship, because there would be nothing to dominate. So I think there comes to a point in time where we have to take into consideration that element of risk tolerance, especially as we're becoming more and more cognizant of our interaction with other species and our dependence upon them. Thanks.
Yes, Dr. Ward.
I really appreciate that. And I've developed this interesting perspective listening to all of us talk this afternoon, in that I feel like we're having to protect ourselves from the National Guard. I went through my entire career feeling that I was a servant of the people and that I was here to help protect the citizens of the United States. I was a medic, so I was taking care of the health of the active duty, but I was also protecting the population. And I feel like we're having to protect ourselves and Cape Cod from the National Guard. They should be working to protect us and make us feel more secure. They should be prepared to help with disaster response, to protect, perhaps to help with the COVID pandemic. We shouldn't feel like we need to protect ourselves from their training with machine guns. It's a very, very bizarre perception that I've just developed this afternoon. And I think we need to realize these people are paid for with taxpayer money to take care of us. We shouldn't feel like we have to protect ourselves and protect our home and Cape Cod water from the National Guard. It's a very twisted situation we're in now, a real flip-flop of stakeholders, as you say.
Yes, you seem to have pointed out a great irony, and yet one of the reasons why the popular imagination may be captured with the idea of the range is the protection of people. So you pointed out a really important aspect of that. Sandy, you want to have something to say? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on the last comment by Dr. Ward that the National Guard is also the group that conducted the research and tried to, in terms of the environmental assessment, and concluded that there was no significant environmental impact. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. And I just also wanted to point out that this project is estimated to cost about $11 million or more to build this machine gun range on 5,000 acres. The 22,000 acre Joint Base Cape Cod is 10% of the land mass of the entire peninsula of Cape Cod. So it's a very significant piece of property. They've already spent $1.2 billion or more to clean up the crisis of pollution that occurred as a result of the inappropriate use of this very fragile ecosystem over a half century or more, particularly since World War II, when so much of the contamination occurred. So I think that and another point is that it's been estimated that our summer tourism population is about 5.3 million people who visit the Cape annually during the months when these summer warriors are going to have their 2-week stays on the Cape for training. So it's at the height of our tourism season, and tourism is our major industry on the Cape and islands. This is where our bread and butter is. This is where we derive the livelihoods that sustain our workforce and sustain our standard of living here on the Cape and islands. And I think that all of these issues have to be taken into consideration, and were not taken into consideration.
Jim, you have something to say. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. I think that probably one of the, when they poll people about what are the important issues for our federal government, that probably the one that stands at the top for federal is, defending us. Okay. So, it's very important to understand that there's not an anti-military component to this. We are all in favor of a strong defense. And we're living in a time where, as Jane mentioned, what warfare is very much, you can't go by 10-year-old plans when you have cyber attacks and this and that about what's the most important thing to do. So climate is one of those issues that has only recently come to the forefront. And I do have something that I'd like to read that came out of the Army War College in let's see if I can find it. Well, it basically states that the most important thing is to lead on climate change. Okay, and you know, or the military will risk losing the support of the people who it in fact is out there to defend. And so that is a #1 priority in the executive summary of the Army War College's big publication that they put out in 2019. And so, you know, my question, the collaborative favors at least a, forget about environmental assessment, which is the lowest form of evaluating a project like this, and start looking at environmental impact statement. The requirements for an environmental impact statement are much more robust, especially in terms of public input. If we're talking about what is the military for, and again, this is not negative towards the military, but I'm saying they are suggesting that this is the important issue to lead on. I would say to the people around here that what you can do if you want to do anything is ask them, the Massachusetts National Guard, to go ahead and you know, if they still want to do this project after they hear some public comment, 900 comments, they need to go through the full environmental impact statement so that we can really get the input of the people towards this as a military project. And so, you know, I guess that's, go and look at the Army War College publication of last year, and you will see that it's important that they not lose our support by doing such a sort of whitewash type of assessment. Let's go deeper. We need to, guys and gals over there. Okay, that's about
Yes,
that content.
yes, Sandy.
I just wanted to point out that the single reason that the Army National Guard has stated for citing this on the Cape is for the convenience of the National Guard personnel. They won't have to drive too far or take too long traveling. That is the single reason that I've heard, that I've found, that they've declared. There is a book that was published in the 1990s called The Enemy Within: The Struggle to Clean Up Cape Cod's Military Superfund Site by Seth Roeblein. And there are many parallels with that particular era and what is happening today with respect to the National Guard's reluctance to have public input, to engage the public. And they stated that the reason that the Joint Base Cape Cod was never closed during the era of base closures was because of the pollution, that they would have to clean up the pollution regardless of what the status of the land was, whether it was military land or it had been turned over to some other entity. So there was no compulsion for them to close the Joint Base Cape Cod, which would have been a very logical base to close, given the fact that this is predominantly a tourism area. I just wanted to make one last point that this would never be sited at the Quabbin Reservoir, which is the watershed in Central Mass, which provides the drinking water for Greater Boston. It would simply be inappropriate to have it sited there. And yet it's okay to have it sited on our fragile watershed. It just doesn't make sense. Thanks.
Well, all that has been said makes me feel as if this issue is urgent. It has great urgency. And yet I want to think about those who are supporting it. I will go back to, yes, Dr. Venkatesan, you had said that there are vested interests in seeing this promulgated. What do you think can be done to oppose it?
I think Sandy has already alluded to it, so I'm not going to repeat what she has just noted, but and also we also had Dr. Ward note that initially too. But what I really just wanted to bring up was one other issue that I think we have to also contend with and also look at as we move forward. And that is, how do we get information out? I mean, you're helping us with this through this show, but the reality is we have a declining newspaper circulation base. We have newspaper closures, and on the Cape, we have a big issue with that. We used to have little town newspapers all across the Cape, and all of those have been consolidating. We have radio stations, but people don't listen necessarily because they can opt out and listen to their own music. The bigger issue that we really have right now is when we do have an issue of social importance, things that perhaps maybe create the community that holds us all on this Cape, getting that information out to create the momentum behind a change that we want to see is a very difficult. And that particular item and that I'm just bringing up is really important, because when we hear any kind of government entity say that they disclose this information, the question is, did they disclose this information consistent with the time period that we're in? You can disclose information, but it may be consistent with the time period where everybody was reading the paper, that we all had very limited sources or channels for getting information, and therefore also had normal social outings. All these things are non-existent to declining today. So it is an entity that represents us, that sole existence is there for us. We are the government. So to think that we should be arguing against an entity that solely exists for our betterment, our protection, our welfare is logically inconsistent. It's almost as though the entity has become independent of its original mandate.
Yes.
And that, to me, is the bigger question that we need to sit back and start to assess, because we do have the power of the vote. And we do have the power of being one small piece of land that can have tremendous amount of autonomy in terms of putting the future that we want to see into action based on the policies we make.
Yes,
I'd like to add to that, Barbara. So the Joint Base has promised to respond to the 900 comments that they received from the public during the public comment period, and we're waiting to hear from them there. Once they have responded, the Environmental Management Commission that is powered with overseeing the Upper Cape water supply, they're going to hold a Zoom meeting with a capacity, we think, of 300 people that was mentioned. So we need people to be on that call. So stay tuned for announcements. It will be announced at capecodclimate.org. That is the website for the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative. They have outstanding communications on what's happening on climate in the Cape, or any of our organizations. Sierra Club 350, Coalition for Social Justice has a weekly newsletter of actions we can take, and it will definitely be there. But I would also say, talk to your friends and family and neighbors, call your elected officials, write letters to the editor. We can't let this flurry of activity die down. We need to keep this topic in the conversation front and center. It's that important.
Yes, Dr. Ward.
I just have one question about both of those comments. And shouldn't, at the very least, the towns that are in the immediate vicinity of the base, shouldn't their Board of Selectmen or their town council or whatever's the appropriate body be being kept appraised of what's going on with this? I got the impression in August, when we first heard about this, that the boards of selectmen didn't even know what was going on. So it's not that we don't even have a newspaper. That's terrible in itself, but we didn't even have the towns that are surrounding the base, and to my understanding, didn't even know what was about to happen.
Yes, the Falmouth Select Board has asked for a period where they can just stop this, to not allow it to go forward until they can have more public comment. But maybe Jim can talk about what's going on in Mashpee and Sandwich. Mashpee, Sandwich, Falmouth, and Bourne are certainly critically involved.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I happen to live in Yarmouth, so, but I am following this. One thing, thank you, Rosemary. The Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative's website enables you to sign up for their news alerts about climate. And that's a wonderful thing to have coming in on your email, and you can learn a lot. It is important that the people in the towns that are surrounding this get involved and comment. If you've got a kid at the elementary school, ask questions. What's this going to be like? Falmouth just went through a situation where they built some windmills, wind farms that were very beneficial financially to the town, and they got shut down after the fact because of people complaining about noise. So I think that, the same thing could happen. We haven't had machine gun fire over there. We're going to have it. And then how easy is it going to be to close it down after it's done? Although that did happen with the wind farm, that may not be possible here. You need to ask questions if you live in those towns. You need to go to your board of selectmen or write to them and ask them to, solicit more comment and input and get very technical about what they want to find out. How noisy is it actually going to be? So although I can't say what's happening now, I have heard people, as Sandra just said, that, the Falmouth, or Barbara, you just said the Falmouth selectmen are asking for a moratorium. They want to discuss it further. That's what needs to happen. That's why we're all here on this, on your show today, Barbara, is that we need to stimulate conversation and then action, which is, again, information seeking. What are we going to be having in our midst? What are the risks? And how can our public officials, right up to, Representative Keating, and others, what can they do to make this process more thorough before it's in our backyard?
Oh, yes. Yes, talking to our representatives, do you think that might be helpful? Dr. Faiman-Silva, I know sometimes political action helps. Do you think that there's the possibility that our senators and representatives can help out with this? Sandy?
Well, we have actually tried to enlist, yes, we have actually tried to enlist the help of Representative Keating. We had a meeting with his aide, but we would like a meeting with him directly. So we're going to be pursuing that. It appears that our boards of selectmen are being approached by the National Guard Bureau that produced a 15-minute video telling their side of the story and sort of focusing on their environmental stewardship without really, it's a sort of an infomercial, and we really need more facts and a more objective view of the situation. I think because they're the ones that stand to benefit from the machine gun range. They've put out a very glossy, fancy video about the benefits of this range, which I think misrepresent the real costs that we're talking about. So yes, we need to do more with our elected officials and get them to help us.
Yes, Jim.
One quick follow-up on that. I would suggest that shows such as yours, Barbara, should be at the television station, should be, the schedulers should put shows like this right next to the guards video. If that thing is playing over and over again, that's one of the ways that people can see the conversation enlarged. If you schedule citizens talking about concerns right next to the guards thing, because I will assure you, and I love the Guard, but I will assure you that there's not a lot of citizens who are concerned in their video. So
yes,
look together so people who are watching your station can see.
Yes, I will see if that can be done. I think that would be very important, a very dramatic way to show that the information hasn't been forthcoming. The real information about this hasn't been forthcoming. Thank you. And Rosemary.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone that in this new administration, Massachusetts in particular has some pretty powerful friends in Washington right now. Gina McCarthy, John Carey, and of course, Senator Warren and
Markey.
Yes. Why am I blanking on my favorite senator?
Ed Markey.
Thank you, Ed Markey. Yes, thank you. So they need to hear from us on this too. So the more letters and emails and calls that they receive, the better.
Yes, well, this program is going to be aired frequently, several times throughout the next succeeding months, and I would hope that I will see if we cannot show this alongside with the guards video. So yes, now do we have any other final comments about this issue? Yes, Ella.
I would like to mention that in addition to contacting our representatives, there are many, many, many grassroots organizations on Cape that are actively discussing this topic, and a successful rally, socially distant, was held in October called Cape in the Crosshairs. It was organized by Cape Cod Sierra Club, but had attendees from the Cape Cod International League of Peace and Justice, Peace and Freedom, the Coalition for Social Justice, Faith Communities Environmental Network, Harwich Climate Action Network, the Nauset Fellowship, the Southeastern Pine Barrens Alliance, Sustainable Practices, and the Cape Cod DSA. There are more grassroots organizations. That is a short list, but I can guarantee there is a group in your community that is doing work related to protecting our environment in general, but is also likely discussing this topic. So there is always the option to take action that way. And because newspapers are not necessarily the most efficient way to share information these days, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, share true, useful information on your social media. There's a lot that we can do in addition to contacting representatives.
Does anyone foresee the need for public rallies? That is standouts. Yes, Madhavi.
I'm not going to speak necessarily to rallies. I do think that they definitely have an importance, but what I would like to speak to is perhaps something related to that. And it's need to be involved. To be a citizen and to live in a community is to be involved in your community. And this is something that we've taken for granted. And that's why over time, those that continue to be involved, unfortunately, are the only voices that have been heard. And they may not necessarily be representative of the needs of everyone. So hopefully, as we are moving forward and we're seeing that we are a global community, if by nothing else, based on the risks that we create for each other, maybe we can become a global community with regard to how we engage with each other. So this is one very large visible example that affects the Upper Cape, where you're seeing the entire Cape coming together to work on this issue, because it's an issue to our Upper Cape neighbors, but definitely also has a trickle-down effect to the rest of us. But had we been more vigilant all the way through and never disenfranchised our rights to actually think about whether our representatives or our government always were doing things that were aligned to our best interest, perhaps we wouldn't be in the position we're in today. So for the future, we can set a new set of values where we become vigilant as citizens, be aware as citizens, be participatory as citizens, because that's not just a privilege, but a responsibility.
Yes, there's a quotation that you mentioned earlier that I feel as if everyone should post on their refrigerators. Would you repeat that for us, your quotation?
I'd be happy to. It's from Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. So it's really basically saying that the moment that we let our own personal gratification or our own personal desire stand in front of the greater good, we all suffer.
Right. And it's worth commenting about Upton Sinclair and the work he did to get the public, eventually to get the public crying for change, which led to legislation and change, real change in the meat industry. Yes, yes. So citizen action. citizen action it's easy to say, but some individuals don't know exactly what steps to take, given, as you pointed out, Madhavi, the fact that many people don't read newspapers. So I guess we do what we can. Let's list them. Letters to the editor, discussions with our friends, but this is not an issue that requires voting. What ultimately, do we have any power as citizens to stop this? What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, that's why, I mean, even the process as it's been prescribed so far has enabled, as we've heard, 900 separate issues that have been raised. So there is no doubt that the only way, instead of saying, do we have any voice, I would say the only way we can have a voice is by using it, using them, all of ours collective voices.
I see.
You know, there's a lot of communications channels. I know that Ella will be the first to tell us that, you know, people her age do not go out and buy the Cape Cod Times and read it in hardcover, or probably go to its website. So we need to remind, and Ella's working with youth on Cape Cod, the Youth Climate Action Network, and what that's all about. And some of the members are working with the Massachusetts Department of Education to bring this, not this machine gun range issue, but climate issues into the curriculum in Massachusetts, which does not exist. And they are working with legislators and the Department of Education to accomplish that. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. You can get involved in helping that curriculum piece. You can get involved in helping your teacher to create a unit that's studying the public process that is happening around this issue. That would be a topical thing to study in your civics class. So, you know, teachers can get involved that way. I mean, yes, our voices are the only way these type of things get, well, let's say, stopped, or the alternative comes to be instead of what's proposed. Yeah.
And so we need many voices, many voices. Yes, Sandy, did you have something?
I think the nationally, I think the important person to be in touch with is Representative Keating. I think he is very instrumental in the decision making, has been for the past 10 years, and I think we need to really put some pressure on him.
Right.
And he serves on the Armed Services Committee.
Oh, yes, writing letters. We'll write to him, email him, and I think it's very easy to find online. If you Google his name, the information about reaching him is really online. So that's a very good suggestion.
Jim, if I may, Congressman Keating is having a town hall on February 3rd via Zoom. And as I understand it, it has filled up, but calls asking for more seats on that town hall, or a second night of the town hall.
Yeah.
Given everything that's going on in Washington, we understand that's a really hard ask, but we do need to keep the pressure on Congressman Keating.
Right. Our viewers may be interested in knowing if there is some kind of deadline. Is the machine gun range going to go forward at a particular date? How much time do we have?
I think
I don't know of any deadline.
Yes,
do you
I
know
think
of?
we need to move forward quickly.
Yeah.
So we have got to start moving on this.
Yes.
Well, yes, Dr. Ward.
I just also want to say that don't forget that, I mean, even though, yes, Keating is our representative, but also this is our military. The Guard were they're the ancestors of the Minutemen, which were back in the old days, were all of us. We would all go if we needed to. And we shouldn't let our military budget run away with our money the way it has. It's ridiculous. I mean, this was something that Eisenhower warned us about, and it's absolutely ridiculous that the budget is what it is, and that, don't think that you can't influence military planning, because you are a citizen. They are supposed to be taking care of us. So I think it's real easy to get intimidated, but you know, and you don't have to talk to just Keating. Talk to others on the House Armed Services Committee, or you know, find somebody on the base, maybe even, who you can work your way up through the state organization. But we really need to remember this is an organization that the purpose of it is to defend us and make us feel better. And if they're off fighting the last war or the last war from 20 or 30 years ago, and they need to refocus on climate change and cybersecurity and you know, current affairs, crowd control, disaster response, hurricane response, helping with COVID. Those are the sorts of things that the Guard does. This machine gun business really, really irks me. And I think we need to, don't be intimidated, I guess is my message. They are our military, and it's our military budget paid for our tax dollars. So make sure that we're heading in the right direction.
Does any other comments before we sign off? I wish we had some kind of checklist that we could leave with viewers of things to do. Perhaps that's something we can think about, a checklist for the citizen moves to make, so that one can check every box that's possible to make citizen action effective. Thank you so much. This has been so important, and so your discussion has been quite persuasive. And so I thank you very much for taking the time to come together to make this information public. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for your activism, which is your show.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
I want to thank viewers for tuning in very much. And I hope that you will tune in again on the next time we get together on Conversations with Barbara. Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.